Hi everybody. Okay, so great news. We can again have a look at some algorithms. This is Unit 3, Lesson 3, Topic 2. And we can have a look at algorithms for storing objects in an array. Algorithms are great. They provide us with the basic steps that we need to follow. So these are really helpful to beginners. In our application, we're going to use arrays to store objects. Do remember, the type of the array must be the class. So, we will have public in the module, array students as student, not as integer, as student, or as person if I want to store persons, or as employee if I want to store employees. That's one of the mistakes that beginners make. They just use as integer always. That's wrong. And then, best for us, we're going to declare those arrays and all the variables that we need to use. So the array counter, and really nice if I declare a maximum to store that in the module. But more about this in the next topic when I will do an example for you. Just to recap a few things regarding partially filled arrays. We use an array counter that will tell me how many elements are stored. So I'll make an array and it's got space for 500 elements, or 20, or 50, or 5,000 if I want to. An array counter initially would be 0. That's the starting value. It tells me how many elements are stored, and initially there would be 0. As soon as I add an element, I update the array counter. So when I use a loop now to traverse the array, it would always go from the start, index 0, to the end of the data. And the end of the data would always be defined by the array counter. Array count -1. That would be my index values from 0 to array count -1 for a loop. And we now know about exceptions. So we need to make provision for exceptions that can be raised. I will raise them in the class that I code. As soon as I update data, I need to test first. Is this data valid? Did the user give me good data? We need to always do that. I also need to make provision for system provided classes and functions. So this is something like convert to integer. If the user didn't give me data in a text box that can be converted to an integer, that specific function is going to raise an exception. So in my class, I need to make provision for that. But we'll have a look at this again. And the enhanced for loop, remember, can't use that when I've got a partially filled array. Okay, so let's have a look at the first algorithm. Let's increase the font a little bit. You should still be able to see it. I need to be able to add data in the next available position in the array. So store one more student, store one more person, one more employee. We're normally always going to make provision for exceptions. So I need a try catch statement. And the only thing that I do before the try statement would be to declare whatever local variables I need to use. So, dim statements. Let's go and add that there. I will declare variables first, and then I've got the line open and my try statement. Next, I will always check if the array has space, if it's not filled yet. So I'm going to check if my array counter would be less than. Either I can use the maximum or my array name, whatever I called the array, so either less than max or array name dot length. Any one of those two would be perfect. So let's go and add both of them there. Wherever I need a statement or so, I'm going to tell you and show you. I'm only going to test for less than, because I can't go up to length or up to maximum with my indexes. So this would always be less than, and less than would always check for one less. Okay, I will always go and create the object and then save the object in the array. So one of the dim statements that I would need to use, let's say, would be something like object student as student. Oops. Haha. Okay, so I'll need a local variable to store the object. That's just sort of the easiest. And now, where I create the object, I'm going to create the object, object student. Oops, caps mustn't be on. So, object student, did it still? Object student, new student, and whatever data was provided for me. Okay, so we are declare the variable, no new. We are create the object, new, and then whatever data we've got. Next, I will save the object in the array. My statement would look something like this. The name of the array, and normally the name of the array would be a plural. I'm going to use array count, because this must be saved in the next position. Array count, and what will I save? Object student. And then very, very important, I need to update array count. I need to increment it. I need to add 1 to it. Okay, and now what input data I need depends on the specific program that I read, that I am coding. But these steps would normally all be exactly the same. And whether I use the length of the array or the maximum constant, really perfectly fine. I will normally enable other processing now. So enable buttons, enable menu items, whatever I need to. I will clear the input controls, ready for the next input, and I will display a confirmation message to the user. And precisely which one you do at what stage doesn't matter. These three options can be interchanged. They all need to be done after I've saved the data, but I can first display a confirmation message and then enable the other processing. Doesn't matter. I am going to display an error message to the user. Normally we use message box. .show or just message box, and over here my message must be something like the array is filled. Nice descriptive message to the user to say, whoopa, the array is filled. And I normally, whenever I display an error message, I start with the word error so that the user knows, oops, something is wrong. If either the input data that the user gave me had a problem, or when we called the constructor to create the object, remember the set properties would be called by the constructor normally, or there's a problem in the class, an exception would be raised. And I need to make sure that I display a message to the user whenever that happens. So normally it would be some or another exception from the class. Let's just go and add that on a new line, and I'm going to do something like this. Going to display the word error and then the name of the exception and call the property message for the exception. Let's just move that up a little bit so that you can see. Okay, so I don't know what exactly went wrong. I will need to rely on the message that's passed to us. Okay, if I now go have a look, at the next algorithm, I very often need to display data, display all the data. So I would normally traverse the array from the start to the end, a for loop, and this is a very good example of such a for loop. Counter will need to be a local variable. Wherever I use for count, this count must be a local variable declared in the method. And if I traverse the data of a filled array from 0 to array count -1, I'm going to get the current object in the array. I use the counter of the for loop, and now I can display the property or the value returned from a method. Pretty much exactly the same as what happened over here. There I call a property, and this is a value from a method that's returned in the previous call. So over here an example of such a statement. I didn't need to save the data first in a variable. That was just one example to you. I could use that whole line that I've got there where I've got this block. Okay, whatever you prefer and whatever suits you. I can also display the data in a reverse order, hey? Then I will just go from the end to the start. So my for loop would look something like this. For count, go from array count -1 to 0, and this would be a step -1 to display from the end to the beginning all the data. And exactly the same statements again. We still need to get the sum. So if I need to calculate the sum or the total of a property value, initialize the sum, have a loop from the start to the end. I will get the current data, and I will add that data to the sum and display the sum after the loop. Or then, very easily, we can get a method that I need the total of. So let's say I, for some or another reason, needed the total of all the semester marks. I would simply take this value stored in semester mark and add it to the sum where we've got the output line over here. So either I can use the property or a method to give me some data. And this method that I need to give me data would always be a function, eh? Functions returns data for me. Same really applies to calculating the average. So either for a property or for data returned by a method, I need to calculate the sum first, and thereafter I will first test if the array is empty, hey? Because I can't have a divide by 0. So I will check if array count, if it's 0, then I know no data is safe. The average would be 0 in this case, otherwise I will calculate the average. And the calculation of the average, that would normally be something like this. Sum divide by how many elements I've stored. Array count tells me how many elements I've stored. So that very well can be my formula. If I need to calculate the average of the data returned by a method, I need to simply take the algorithm given to us just now and I need to adapt it. Wherever a property was called, I need to call a method to do so. We need to update the data stored in the array for all the objects quite often. So everybody test 1 must be increased by 10%. Okay? Or everybody's salaries, all the employees' salaries must be increased end of the year when it's time for increases. Now remember, whenever we're updating data, we always need a try-catch statement. Okay? So for updates, we always need to include all those statements in a try-catch. I'm going to get whatever increase value I need. Again, a loop, apologies, from start to end. I will get the current object, so that one at position C and T count, and now I will call a method for the current object. So if array employees, everybody's salaries must be increased by a certain percentage, I can call a method increase salary and send the parameter, whatever data I got, as a parameter to the method. And this loop will traverse then all the objects one by one from 0 to 1 to 3 to 4 and call the increase salary method for all of them. Sometimes I would need to use a property to assign new data to all of the objects. So again, same, I will use a try-catch statement because I'm updating data. I will get before the loop the value, and then again I will change. So let's say I wanted to initialize all the student test 1 values to zeros. I want to, maybe I deleted some data, not all of them, and I just want to make sure everything starts at zeros again. So array students of count test 1 must be 0. This statement will, if I do it in a loop, remember counter goes from 0 to end of the indexes. This will initialize everybody's test 1s to 0. If I need to initialize all the tests, then I simply add 3 statements here. Test 1, test 2 and test 3 must be initialized to 0. Find the highest property or then method value. I can find the highest semester mark. What do I need to do? Remember now, I'm not storing the data anymore. I'm going to store the index of the highest found. In a normal array where we just store numbers, we can store the highest number, perfectly fine. But now I'd like to know which position had the highest, which index. Was it 0, 1, 2, 3 or 4? Because I normally need the name and the surname and all of the data. Just having the test 1 mark that's the highest don't help me. I need the name and the student number of that student. Okay? So I only need to remember the index 0 or 1 or 2, whatever, of the highest value. So now I will assign 0, first element I'm going to assume is the highest. So assign the 0 index to highest. Then I'm going to traverse the array still to find the highest, same as before. I'm not going to start at position 0 because I've already assumed in the previous statement 0 is the highest. I'm starting at position 1 and I go to the end, and now I'm going to test if the property or the method call, hey, that's also perfectly fine. I can either a property or a method find the highest. Is bigger than the highest property or method. For an example of this statement, we're going to wait until the example video that I make in topic 3. When I find the data, I'm going to only store counter as the next highest. So I'm going to store count only, the loop counter, the one used by the loop to traverse for count. So now I only say, oh, okay, found this position, that's the highest. Save that then. And then after the loop, I can display the data. So let's say I found the highest semester mark. I can use the index, high index, to display the name and the student number and the semester mark and the 3 test marks as well if I want to. Important, high index. Okay, but I explain this in detail with you because I need the full code really. So we go have a look at this with the first example that I do for you. In the same matter, we can find the lowest property or method value, and I just simply need to adopt this array. I'm not going to find bigger than now, I will find less than. This algorithm will find the position of a specific value. Let's say the user entered a name. We need to find that name in the array. If it's not there, we need to tell the user. If it's there, we need to maybe update or display some data. So to find the position, the index of a specific value is rather important. So before the loop, we will get the data, so the name, for example, to find. Then we're going to assign -1 to position. Okay, so right at the start, -1 tells us data is not found. Before we start, we assign -1 to say we didn't find the data yet. I will now need a loop to traverse the array, so from start to end. And then I'm going to test if the current element, so at position count, if that is the data that I need to find. So if I've got an if statement, it would be something like if array students position count, if that name is equal to, let's say the user typed in to the text box and we saved it in variable name. So, or we could call it search name. Then we would have saved the data from, let's say, the text box in a variable, local variable called search name. So if we find it, well, then we're going to store that position in counter. So position, what do I save? I save CNT. So I store the index of where I found the data. And when the loop is finished, I can check. If position stores -1 still, then I know I didn't find the error, the data. I can display an error message. Otherwise, I know my data is found. I can process, so display, update, do whatever I need to, and I will use position as the index. So if I needed to go and display some data, I will use array students of position, let's say to get the student number. I just wanted to go and display the student number of Sue. I would do that, but I can process however I need to. One algorithm that builds on the previous one would be to code a function in the application to find a position for me. So do the processing that we did, and the function will return either -1 if no data is found, or it would return the position. My algorithm stays the same, except that the function will get a parameter. This parameter would now be the data that we need to find, and the function returns the position. So it returns position, and the position will either return the index of where I found the data, or -1 if the data wasn't found, and I can use it as such. So let's say I had to update or display specific data. If I need to update the data, I will always use a try-catch statement. Let's assume that find position function is coded. So I will accept the data that I need to find, the name for example. I will call find position, I will send the data to it, and I will get back the position. And now I can check if position is within the range of the array. I can find the data, or I can again check if position is -1, and then I know I don't have the data. So I can do my processing that I need to if the data was found, and I use position as the index, or then display. Normally we're going to display an error message if the data was not found. And if I do an update, I will always include that in a try-catch statement, so that any exceptions that might be raised is caught and the messages are displayed to the user. We can use also an if statement that's slightly different. So after I call find position, I can first test if the position is -1. If it's -1, I know the data isn't found. I can display an error message. Otherwise, if it's anything but -1, I know the data is found. And same as before, position can be the index to the array. Whatever you feel more comfortable with. Last algorithm really would be something like count the matches. I want to know how many students have a pass mark for the semester test. So very often I would get the value to find before the loop. If it's a button that says go display how many students passed, it would be defined by the button itself. Whenever I count before the loop, I will initialize the counter to 0. I'm going to have my loop to traverse the array, and then I'm going to test if the data falls within the values that I need to find. If so, increment the counter after the loop. Go and display normally the number of values that we need. Next, we very often want to populate a combo box, normally done at the start of displaying a form in the form load event procedure with the data in the array. So, important to note these two things. We will add the data from the array in precisely the same sequence to the combo box. Then we can use the index of the combo box as the index of the array, and alternatively. So that means if something is position 0, in the array, that's also the index to the combo box. If something is in position 1 in the array, that's also the position of the combo box. We would normally clear the combo box items. If we update the data, this is needed. Traverse the array and now add the data of the current element in the array to the combo box. And again, I've got an example as soon as we do the examples. Important to know, just to make it nice and user-friendly to the user, we're going to first select the first item of the combo box after the loop, so that when the user sees the data, it doesn't see a blank combo box, but sees the data of the first element in that combo box. Then we very often want to allow the user, after they now selected something in the combo box, to update or display that specific element. We're going to do it as follows. And if we update, we're going to add a try catch statement. If we just display data, no need for that. I'm going to get the index of the item selected and store that in position. I'm going to verify that the position is valid. So is it from 0 to array counter -1? If so, I'm going to process it as I need to. Display or update, whatever I need to do. I am going to use position as the index of the data to the array. Okay? Use this position that I got from the combo box as the index of the array. If the position wasn't valid, so that means maybe the user didn't select something, something went wrong, I will display an error always. If we just have a look at exceptions again, really important because students get a little bit confused with these two things. When do I use a try catch statement and when do I use the throw statement? So in the application, we're always just going to use the try catch statement. I use it in my application. We now want to update some object data. Okay, so whenever I'm going to update the object, be it with a property or a method call, I use try catch. I don't need it when I'm going to display data. Obviously also when I create the object, I'm going to use the try catch statement. So whenever I create the object, whenever I'm going to update the object data in the array. If I'm just displaying, my code will never raise an exception. No need for the try catch then. In the class, only in the class, we're going to use the throw new exception statement. We're going to raise, that's the nice word to use, we're going to raise an exception whenever my data that I got is not valid. So whenever there would be a problem, I'm going to raise an exception. And this would always be in the set properties, in the methods that update the data of the class, and then if I have a read-only property, only place for this would now be in the constructor. Okay, so normally the set properties, normally in the methods of the class, if I've got a read-only property, because that property doesn't have a set section, then I will need to test in the constructor before assigning the data. But all these I'm going to do as an example in the next section. Thanks.